Emma grew up with a story that was told to her so often it became a part of her identity. According to her parents, when she was just 5 years old, their family home caught fire in the middle of the night. The flames spread quickly, swallowing the house in minutes. She was said to have been trapped in her bedroom, while smoke filled the air, until her father heroically carried her out. Her parents told her she had barely survived, and she should always remember how lucky she was. But as Emma got older, small details started to bother her. For someone who had been caught in such a dangerous blaze, she had no visible scars, not even the faintest mark. She had also never experienced the kind of respiratory issues one would expect after inhaling thick smoke. Whenever she asked questions, her parents gave short, vague answers. "You were too young to remember," her mother would say, or, "Some things are better forgotten." The more they avoided specifics, the more suspicious she became. Her childhood bedroom was another mystery. In their current house, Emma had no toys, photographs, or belongings from before the fire. Her parents claimed everything had been destroyed, but sometimes she wondered why not even a single picture had been saved. Families usually salvage something, a photo album, a keepsake, but her life before the fire seemed completely erased. It was as if her entire existence had been rewritten, beginning the day she supposedly survived. At night, Emma often tried to summon memories of the fire. She would close her eyes and force herself to imagine the heat, the smoke, the sound of alarms, but nothing came. The only images that surfaced were vague flashes: a hallway, the sound of crying, and the feeling of someone pulling her arm. Yet whenever she thought she was about to remember more, her mind shut down, leaving her frustrated and unsettled. Her friends found the story fascinating. They admired her bravery for surviving something so tragic, even though she couldn't recall the details. Sometimes she pretended to remember more than she actually did, just to satisfy their curiosity. But deep down, Emma couldn't shake the sense that something about her past didn't make sense. It wasn't just the missing memories. It was the silence in her parents' eyes whenever the fire was mentioned, as if they were hiding something far more terrifying than flames. One rainy evening, when Emma was 17, she sat awake in her room long past midnight. The storm rattled the windows, and the house was unusually quiet, except for the muffled hum of her parents' voices drifting up from the kitchen below. Normally, their late-night conversations were dull, about bills, work, or groceries. But this time, something in their tone made her pause. Their voices were hushed but sharp, as though they were afraid of being overheard. She crept out of bed, and pressed her ear against the floorboards, near the vent that connected to the kitchen. The sound grew clearer. Her father's voice carried a strain of guilt. "We can't keep this from her forever. She's getting older, she'll start asking the wrong questions." Emma's heart skipped a beat. He couldn't possibly be talking about the fire, could he? Her pulse quickened as her mother replied, almost angrily, "If she finds out, everything will fall apart. She'll never forgive us. Do you understand?" "Never." Emma froze, her hands trembling against the cold wood. The weight of those words pressed into her chest like a stone. All her life, she had suspected something was off, but this was the first time she had overheard her parents admit it themselves. They weren't just hiding details. They were hiding the truth. And whatever it was bad enough that her mother was terrified of Emma discovering it. For the rest of the night, she lay awake in her bed, staring at the ceiling. Her mind spun with possibilities, each one darker than the last. What did they mean she would never forgive them? What kind of secret could a parent possibly keep from their own child? Emma's breathing grew shallow as she realized that maybe her life story, the fire, the survival, the lost memories, wasn't just incomplete. Maybe it was a complete fabrication. The next morning, her parents acted as if nothing had happened. They greeted her with the same forced smiles, made her breakfast, and asked about school. But when Emma looked at them now, she didn't see parents. She saw two actors trapped in a performance, desperately keeping their roles intact. Their words from the night before clung to her like a shadow, whispering that the truth was closer than she thought, but far more dangerous than she could imagine. A week after overhearing her parents' late-night argument, Emma found herself restless and unable to shake the unease growing inside her. One Saturday afternoon, while her parents were out running errands, she decided to explore the attic, a place she had rarely been allowed to enter. The attic was dusty and cluttered, filled with old boxes stacked carelessly, their labels faded and unreadable. She felt her pulse quicken as she realized that if her parents were hiding anything, this was the one place they thought she would never check. Carefully, she pushed aside stacks of books and forgotten decorations until her eyes landed on a small, metal box tucked beneath a pile of worn blankets. Unlike the other items, This box was locked and polished, as though someone had placed it there deliberately. The sight of it filled Emma with both dread and determination. Her hands shook as she carried it over to the lone beam of sunlight streaming through a crack in the roof. The lock was old, and after a few forceful attempts with a hairpin, it finally gave way with a sharp click. Inside, she expected to find old receipts or maybe even forgotten jewelry, but what she found stopped her breath. Lying at the very top was a photograph. It showed a little girl who looked exactly like Emma, dressed in a frilly white dress, smiling shyly at the camera. But standing beside her was another child, the same age, with the same features, identical eyes, identical smile, identical everything. Emma stared at the photo in disbelief. She had never, in her entire life, seen this other girl before. Her mind raced with questions. Who was this child? Why had her parents never mentioned her? The date scribbled on the back of the photo was even more unsettling. It was taken only a few months before the supposed fire. Emma's throat went dry as she realized the photo directly contradicted everything she had been told. If the fire had destroyed all of her childhood belongings, then how had this photograph survived? And why was it hidden away in a locked box instead of kept safely in a family album? The air in the attic felt heavier now, pressing down on her as she clutched the photograph to her chest. A chill ran down her spine as she imagined her parents returning home to find her with it. She knew this was no ordinary picture. This was evidence. Evidence that her past wasn't what she had been led to believe. As the floorboards creaked beneath her feet, Emma realized something with absolute certainty. The story of the fire was unraveling, and she had just uncovered the first real thread. After discovering the photograph in the attic, Emma couldn't stop thinking about the other child, the one who looked just like her. Days passed, but the image haunted her every waking thought. She felt as though her entire life was slipping out of her control, and she needed answers. One idea kept nagging at her: the hospital. If the fire had truly happened, there would have been a record of her treatment. And if not, then the hospital might hold the only proof of what really occurred that night. With her parents distracted one afternoon, Emma slipped out and made her way to the local hospital archives. The building smelled faintly of disinfectant and age, its hallways lined with tall cabinets of patient files stretching back decades. At the records desk, she gave her name, and after a long wait, a nurse returned with a manila folder. It was thinner than she expected. Her fingers trembled as she opened it, scanning the documents inside. What she found was not what she had been told her whole life. There was no mention of burns, no mention of fire injuries, not even a note about smoke inhalation. Instead, the admission report listed her condition as severe psychological shock, accompanied by partial memory loss. Her stomach twisted as she read on. The file stated she had been brought in by her parents late one night, her clothes dirty but completely untouched by flames. She was described as frightened, inconsolable, and barely able to speak. But what unsettled her most was a line buried in the middle of the report: 2 minors admitted. Emma blinked, rereading the sentence over and over. 2. She was alone, wasn't she? The report gave no names, only patient IDs, one of which matched hers, while the other was blacked out with heavy ink. Emma's hands grew clammy as she turned the last page. The notes ended abruptly with the words, "One child discharged. Case closed." There was no mention of what happened to the other child, no signature from a doctor explaining why the record was incomplete. It was as though the second file had been deliberately erased from history. Her heart pounded against her ribs. Was the other child the girl in the photograph? Was this why her parents had been lying all along? Emma shoved the folder back into its envelope, her mind reeling. She had come searching for clarity, but had stumbled upon an even darker mystery. If there had truly been another child that night, someone who was admitted alongside her, then what happened to them? Why had their file been censored? And more importantly, why had her parents never told her she wasn't alone when she entered that hospital? After uncovering the strange hospital file, Emma realized there was only one place left to turn: the neighborhood where she had supposedly lived before the fire. The drive there felt surreal, as though she were heading toward a past that didn't quite belong to her. When she arrived, the house she had once called home was long gone, demolished years earlier, replaced by a small patch of empty land overgrown with weeds. But one thing hadn't changed: a weathered, 2-story house across the street, where an elderly neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, still lived. Emma's parents had mentioned her name in passing when she was younger, though never with much detail. Summoning her courage, Emma knocked on the door. Mrs. Patterson answered slowly, her tired eyes widening in surprise as she looked Emma up and down. "My God," the woman whispered. "You look exactly the same." Emma explained who she was, that she had lived across the street as a child. The old woman's face grew pale, and for a moment, Emma thought she might slam the door. But instead, Mrs. Patterson motioned her inside, her hands trembling as she set a teacup on the table. "I always wondered if you'd ever come back here," she murmured. "But I never thought your parents would let you." At first, Emma carefully mentioned the story her parents had always told her: the fire, the destruction, her supposed survival. The neighbor's expression darkened instantly. She shook her head and said firmly, "There was no fire." Emma felt the words hit her like ice water. Mrs. Patterson went on, her voice lowering to a whisper. "That night, I remember the screaming, the sirens. Police cars lined up on the street. But there were no flames, no smoke. Your parents carried you out of the house, yes, but they weren't alone." And Emma leaned forward, her heart hammering against her ribs. "What do you mean, they weren't alone?" she asked. The old woman's lips trembled as she answered, "There was another child with you. A little girl. She looked just like you. I saw her with my own eyes." The air seemed to leave the room. Emma felt her stomach twist as the photograph, the hospital file, and now this woman's words all collided into one undeniable truth. The other child wasn't some figment of imagination. She was real. Patterson's voice grew more fragile as she continued. "After that night, I never saw the other girl again. The police came and went, but nothing was ever explained. Your parents avoided me, stopped speaking to the neighbors. It was as if they wanted everyone to forget." Her eyes flickered nervously toward the window, as though speaking these words out loud was dangerous even now. Emma sat frozen, clutching her knees, every part of her body screaming that she had stumbled into something her parents had fought to bury for years. The truth about the fire was unraveling faster than she could keep up with. Emma couldn't keep silent any longer. The weight of the photograph, the hospital file, and Mrs. Patterson's trembling confession pressed on her like a storm she could no longer outrun. That night, she confronted her parents. They were sitting in the living room, her mother knitting quietly while her father stared blankly at the television. Emma stepped forward, holding up the photograph like evidence in a trial. "Who is she?" she demanded, her voice sharper than she expected. Her parents froze instantly, the color draining from their faces. Her father's mouth opened as if to speak, but no words came out. It was her mother who finally broke, tears welling in her eyes. "You weren't supposed to find that," she whispered, her hands trembling. "We wanted to protect you." Emma's chest tightened. "Protect me from what? Who is the girl? Why was I told I survived a fire when there was never one?" The silence that followed was suffocating, broken only by the faint ticking of the wall clock. Finally, her father lowered his head, his voice heavy with defeat. "She wasn't just another girl, Emma. She was your sister, your twin." The word hung in the air like a blade. Emma staggered back, her throat tightening. A sister. A twin. Every question she had ever asked about her missing past suddenly sharpened into focus. The photograph, the second hospital file, the neighbor's memory. It all made sense now. Her parents hadn't erased a tragedy, they had erased a person. Her mother's sobs filled the room as she tried to explain. "Something happened that night, something you were too young to understand. We couldn't let you live with the truth. It would have destroyed you. So we told you there was a fire. We thought, if you believed everything was lost, maybe you could move on." Emma stared at her in disbelief, her heart pounding. Move on? How could she move on from a sister she never even knew existed? Emma's mind raced, piecing everything together. The erased hospital records, the hidden photograph, the whispers in the night. They weren't just lies, they were fragments of a cover-up. And yet, her parents still hadn't told her what had actually happened. Where was her sister now? Why had they buried her memory so deeply? Emma's voice shook as she pressed harder, demanding answers, but she could see the fear in her parents' eyes. It wasn't just guilt they carried. It was terror. For days after her parents' confession, Emma drifted through life in a haze. Every corner of her house now felt unfamiliar. Every word from her parents' mouths felt poisoned with half-truths. She couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't stop wondering about the sister she never knew she had. Then, one late afternoon, as she returned home from school, she noticed a plain white envelope on the front porch. There was no name, no return address. Just her own first name written in bold, shaky handwriting across the front. Her fingers trembled as she tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper. The message was short, but its impact sent shivers racing down her spine. "Your sister is alive. She's been waiting for you." For a moment, Emma could only stare at the words, her heartbeat hammering in her ears. The handwriting was strange, unfamiliar, yet there was a deliberate urgency in every letter. Beneath the note was a small photograph, and when Emma flipped it over, her breath caught in her throat. The photo showed a girl standing in what looked like an abandoned building, her figure partly shadowed, her face angled just enough to catch the light. Emma's blood ran cold. The girl looked exactly like her. Same dark hair, same sharp jawline, but her expression was harder, colder, her eyes glinting with something unsettling. Unlike Emma's familiar warmth, this version of herself seemed almost unrecognizable, like a reflection twisted by secrets and pain. Emma's hands shook as she studied the photo. Was this real? Could it be recent? The clothes the girl wore didn't look old. In fact, the picture seemed like it could have been taken just weeks ago. If this was truly her twin, then someone had been watching Emma closely enough to send this message now. But why? And who was behind it? The sister herself, or someone else pulling the strings? Every sound in the house suddenly felt amplified. The ticking clock, the faint hum of the refrigerator, even the creak of the floorboards upstairs. Emma clutched the photo tighter, her breath shallow. Someone out there knew the truth about her past, someone who had waited years to reveal it. The letter wasn't just a message, it was an invitation, or maybe even a warning. And as Emma stared at the eerie image of her mirror self, she felt the chilling certainty that her life was about to spiral into something far darker than she had ever imagined. And so, Emma's world was shattered. The fire she had believed in her whole life was nothing more than a mask for something far more disturbing. A missing twin, a past erased, and now, an anonymous letter proving her sister was still out there. But where had she been all these years? Who had taken her? And why had she returned now, with eyes that no longer held innocence, but something far more sinister? Sometimes, the most terrifying truths aren't buried in flames, they're buried in secrets. And when those secrets finally surface, they don't just change the story, they change everything.
If you liked this video, don't forget to hit that like button, share it with your friends, and drop your thoughts in the comments below. Most importantly, subscribe and hit the bell icon so the next secret finds you first.